This is Beyond the Business.
What if the real problem with transport is not what we drive, but how the system itself is designed? Most conversations about land transport get stuck very quickly. Cars versus public transport, electric versus fuel, batteries versus engine. Those debates can go on forever and they rarely explain anything. So, in this episode, I want to step away from categories and technologies. Instead of asking what kind of transport is better, I want to ask a different question. What function does land transport actually serve? And what does that function produce? Because land transport operates in two very different roles. One is social, moving people through cities and regions so daily life can function. And the other one is commercial, moving goods, materials, and value across space. These two functions look similar on the surface: roads, vehicles, infrastructure, but economically and environmentally, they behave very differently. This episode is not about choosing buses over cars or batteries over fuel. It's about understanding how land transport is structured, why that structure generates the costs and waste we see today, and also why changing vehicles without changing architecture rarely changes the outcome. That's what we are going to unpack. So, social transport, the part nobody prices honestly. We all know what public transport does. It moves people, it gets someone to work, to school, to hospital, back home. Functionally, it's quite simple. But its real purpose is bigger than that. It's bigger than just a ride. Public transport is one of the main economic and environmental layers of a city. It shapes who can participate in daily life and at what cost to the system around them. Not just how fast you get there, but who gets access, who gets excluded, and what kind of footprint gets normalized as everyday life. So now here's the part we almost never say out loud. Public transport is often unprofitable by design. And in theory, that is fine. Public transport doesn't have to be profitable to be valuable. It can lose money on tickets and still create value for the whole system. But the story usually stops there. And that's where the blind spot begins. Because what is presented as a cheap service is, in reality, a mandatory collective investment. You pay for it whether you use it or not. You can walk to work, you can cycle, you can own a car, you can drive an EV and feel like you have exited the fossil world. And still, every month, part of your money keeps that diesel bus running, that metro line operating, that intercity rail maintained, that whole network financed. So the cheap ticket is only half the payment. The rest sits elsewhere in taxes, municipal budgets, infrastructure funding that you never see as a separate line. You don't feel it like a purchase, but it's still a payment. And there is another uncomfortable layer. Even when the system is funded collectively, the return is uneven. You can live in a capital city with modern fleets and clean buses, while someone elsewhere funds the same system but rides older, dirtier, less reliable transport. Same country, same tax logic, different outcome. Public transport is presented as a service. In reality, it is a mandatory collective investment with uneven returns. Now let's connect it to the part people avoid. Isn't only economic structure, it's also environmental one. Because when the public fleet is still running on diesel or the rail network is still powered by the old grid mix, that collective investment becomes a collective footprint. You don't have to personally burn fuel to finance burning fuel. That's the real paradox. You can make a clean personal choice and still be funding the dirty system around you, not because you support it, but because you are tied into it. People are forced to finance emissions they may actively oppose. And once you see that, the logic flips. It's not just nice to demand cleaner public transport, it's rational. If citizens are paying into the system no matter what, then demanding modern, low emission fleets isn't activism, it's a basic fairness. It's asking for the investment you already make to stop producing waste you never choose. That's why social transport is never just about buses or metro lines. It's a mirror of how modern systems work. Shared costs, limited choice, and a footprint that becomes collective even when conscience is personal. Let's talk a little bit about commercial transport. When profit moves but responsibility stays behind. The story usually sounds simple. Goods moved, the economy works, companies earn money, and shelves stay full. But that's the only visible layer. Commercial transport is not just cars driving from point A to point B. It's a heavy trucks, loaded trains, continuous freights flows. And those flows interact with the infrastructure very differently than social transport. Commercial transport puts disproportionately higher pressure on shared systems. Roads wear out faster, rail tracks degrade under heavier loads, tires break down into particles that never disappear, diesel engines emit more simply because they carry more and move more. And here is the key question we almost never ask: who actually pays for this pressure? Because the answer is rarely only the company. Yes, transport companies pay fuel taxes, yes, they pay registration fees, and yes, they pay corporate taxes based on profit. But the real costs don't stop there. Road maintenance is paid from public budgets. Rail infrastructure is financed collectively. Waste from tires, brakes, and wear enters the same waste system everyone pays for. Air pollution affects everyone breathing nearby, regardless of who caused it. So, commercial transport generates private profit, but its environmental and infrastructure costs are distributed across society. And this is the blind spot. The system treats commercial transport as an economic necessity, but handles its consequences as a shared inconvenience. If a freight truck destroys the road faster, the road is repaired with public money. If emissions increase in a city, the health impact is shared by residents. If waste accumulates, disposal is paid through municipal systems. The responsibility does not scale with impact, and that's where the imbalance appears. Commercial transport benefits from infrastructure it does not fully finance, uses public space more intensively than private citizens, and leaves behind environmental effects that are not priced at the point of use. So the system works, but it works by spreading the cost outward. And public transport is subsidized openly. Commercial transport is subsidized indirectly. Not through tickets, but through roads, air, land, and way systems that everyone pays for, including those who don't profit from transport activity at all. So this creates an uncomfortable reality. When society finances the side effects of economic movement without having a mechanism to measure who creates how much pressure. Commercial transport is presented as efficiency. In reality, it is a mandatory collective investment with uneven returns. Some actors gain speed and scale, everyone else absorbs wear, pollution, and long term damage. That doesn't make commercial transport bad, it makes the current model incomplete. Because when profit moves faster than responsibility, the bill never disappears. It just lands somewhere else. Let's talk a little bit about responsibility also, and how responsibility is detached from the impact. So let's pause for the moment and ask a simple question. If transport shapes the air we breathe, the roads we share, and the cities we live in, why is responsibility still treated as something abstract? Today, land transport lives inside a contradiction. Impact is individual, but responsibility is collective. The more a vehicle moves, the more it wears down roads. The heavier it is, the faster infrastructure degrades. The more it burns, the more emissions stay exactly where people live. Yet the cost of all of this is absorbed by everyone. Road maintenance is socialized, air pollution is averaged out, health consequences appear later somewhere else, environmental damage is spread thin enough that it feels invisible. This is not a lack of tools, it is a choice not to use them here. In other sectors, impact is treated differently. In energy and heavy industry, emissions are measured, tracked, and priced because they create a real load on the system. Responsibility follows damage, not the intention. Land transport was left outside that logic. Mileage stays largely invisible, vehicle size matters only at the margins, usage intensity rarely translates into proportional responsibility. As a result, two people can live in the same city, breathe the same air, and pay the same indirect costs while loading the system in completely different ways. And that is the blind spot. We spend endless time debating technology, engines, batteries, fuels, bans, but the imbalance sits deeper than that. Responsibility does not follow impact. And when responsibility is detached from impact, the system loses its ability to correct itself. An impact based approach to land transport would change this relationship, not by adding another generic tax, not by moralizing behavior, but reconnecting costs with a real load. The more you use the system, the more you maintain it. The more you pollute shared space, the more you contribute to repairing it. The less you load roads, air, and infrastructure, the smaller your burden becomes. This is not about paying more, it is about paying accurately. Because the cost already exists. It is simply hidden inside healthcare, infrastructure decay, urban pollution, and public budgets. When responsibility follows impact, transport stops being a political argument and starts behaving like a system that can actually be managed. Yes, not easy, but grounded in reality. And without that grounding, no amount of green branding, electric vehicles, or urban restrictions will fix what is structurally misaligned. Land transport does not suffer from a lack of innovation. It suffers from a responsibility gap that no longer matches the world it operates in. So let me ask you something. If transport is essential for society and emissions are a shared problem, why does responsibility still feel optional? We have just walked through social transport and commercial transport, two different functions, two different logics, but the same pattern underneath. Costs are shared, benefits are uneven, decisions are made upstream, and the environmental debt settles downstream in the air we breathe, in the roads we repair, and in the systems we quietly subsidize. You can choose not to drive, you can choose public transport, you can buy an electric car or ride a bicycle. but you still finance the system as it exists today, including the emissions you may actively oppose. So that's the uncomfortable part. Because once you see transport as a system, not as vehicles, not as fuel, not as lifestyle choices, the question stops being about preference. It becomes a question of design. Who carries the cost, who benefits from the movement, and who pays when the system wears down the environment it depends on? If responsibility stays diffuse, nothing really changes. If cost stays hidden, accountability never arrives. So maybe the real question isn't how we move people and goods. Maybe the real question is how long can we afford systems where everyone pays but no one truly owns the impact?